But first, we start with that Supreme Court decision announced just hours ago, a major decision on gun rights in our country, ruling Americans have a right to carry firearms in public, striking down a New York gun law. We have team coverage of this major ruling, and we begin with ABC News' Faith Abube diving into what this means for state law right now.
The U.S. Supreme Court Thursday striking down New York's century-old restriction on concealed firearms. 6 out of the 9 justices siding with gun rights advocates in New York that the state's proper cause requirement to obtain a concealed carry license violates the Constitution. A group of New York gun owners asked the Supreme Court to establish a fundamental right to carry a handgun for self-defense outside the home. The gun rights advocates challenged a century-old New York statute that requires applicants for concealed carry permits to show proper cause or a specific special need for possessing a firearm in public places. The New York State Rifle and Pistol Association and 2 individual gun owners call the standard so high that it violates the Second Amendment. Some of the conservative justices worried that local officials have too much discretion.
Why isn't it good enough to say I live in a violent area and I want to be able to defend myself?
But New York State maintained that gun rights are not unlimited and that reasonable barriers to concealed carry are necessary for public safety. The state arguing that striking down the law would lead to more guns on the streets.
They multiply the number of firearms that are being carried in very densely populated places, and there is a much higher risk.
29 states require concealed carry permits, 8 of those, including New York, giving authorities discretion to deny permits to anyone who cannot show a special need. In the months after the High Court heard the case, there have been 2 high-profile mass shootings in New York, one in a subway car in Brooklyn, and another apparently racially motivated attack at a Buffalo supermarket, killing 10 Black Americans. And the reaction from New York Governor Kathy Hochul this afternoon is that this Supreme Court decision, quote, is sending us backwards in our efforts to protect families and prevent gun violence. At the Supreme Court, Faith Abube, ABC News.
All right, Faith, thank you so much. For more on this, the president of the Constitutional Accountability Center, Elizabeth Wydra, joining me now. Thanks so much for being here, Elizabeth. First of all, what do you make of Clarence Thomas's opinion in this case?
It's the biggest expansion of gun rights in over a decade. The Supreme Court in 2008 recognized that there was an individual right to have a gun in self-defense in the home. And the question ever since that decision has been, what does that mean for all of the other ways in which gun violence prevention manifests itself in state laws? Does this apply to the types of firearms? Does it apply to places? And what we saw from the Supreme Court this morning was a dramatic expansion of the individual right to have a gun, to say that the New York law that had been in existence for a century was unconstitutional. And this is, I think, extremely concerning for gun violence prevention advocates, for people who feel unsafe. And, the Supreme Court's ruling did, the mayor of New York City did make the point that it seemed a little out of touch with today's concerns about mass shootings, going through the history over and over. And the history is relevant, of course, but the Supreme Court, even in conservative Justice Scalia's opinion over a decade ago, recognizing the individual right to have a gun, recognized that there could be sensible gun regulations. And so the question now, an urgent question, is, well, what does it mean for all of the laws that are on the books already and the laws that are being contemplated, including by Congress, to help prevent the extraordinary mass violence that we've been seeing in these shootings, and the fact noted in Justice Breyer's dissent that gun violence has surpassed motor vehicle accidents in the leading cause of death for children and adolescents.
So the Supreme, help me through the technicality here. The Supreme Court states the constitutional right to bear arms in public for self-defense is not, quote, a second-class right. So help me understand what exactly is a second-class right. Is there first-class rights? Aren't all rights equal under the rule of law?
Yes, and I think, so this is a refrain that we've heard from the more conservative justices over the years, because after the Supreme Court in 2008 recognized that there was an individual Second Amendment right to have a gun, they took no action on state laws that were put into place on, the type of firearms, places in which firearms could be taken. And so the conservative justices, including Justice Thomas, who authored today's opinion, were very frustrated by the Supreme Court's inaction on those state gun laws. And then with the addition of more conservative justices by former President Trump, we saw a 6-justice majority that was more willing to expand gun rights and to take on these state gun violence prevention laws. And what Justice Thomas is saying there is that he thinks that the limitations on the Second Amendment individual right had made it a second-class right. Of course, folks on the other side would say the right to have a firearm is a right that can and should be regulated under the Constitution, given the very real consequence of that right, which could be and has been and will be deadly in many instances.
Right. Boy, a lot to follow, and a lot of fallout to come, I'm sure. We're going to hear from both sides quite a bit now. Elizabeth Wydra, thank you so much.
States. Elizabeth, different states are situated differently when it comes to public safety. There's New York, there's Massachusetts, there's Wyoming, there's North Dakota. And over the years, they've developed different answers. How much does this ruling by the Supreme Court, the opinion by Justice Thomas, kind of nationalize a single standard for who can walk around the streets armed?
It really throws things into uncertainty is, I think, the answer. There have been state laws passed for gun violence prevention reasons from coast to coast. There are differences between the states, and that is part of our federalist system, our laboratory of democracy, of states trying to balance the constitutional right to have a gun for self-defense with public safety concerns, and as you mentioned, the particular needs of that state. But what this ruling does guarantee is certainly a lot more litigation to come on whether or not those laws pass constitutional muster. And even laws that have already been upheld, I think, could come under new challenge. And that's extremely concerning for many of us who look at these mass shootings, who look at the fact that gun violence has become the leading cause of death among children and adolescents, and are extremely worried, and that the Supreme Court does seem to be out of step with a lot of the concerns that state legislatures are expressing when they pass these laws.
Let's talk more about just the concerns and the controversy. I mean, the question of will this decision by the Supreme Court actually put more guns in the hands of criminals or help protect law-abiding citizens? I mean, this is the question everybody is asking since understanding more about the decision today.
Absolutely, and that's a question that, the New York State brief tried to say should be something that's left more to the legislatures, not judges. We have on the other side, Justice Thomas and the gun rights proponents asserting that really history is the judge. But even on the history, there are other regulations that show that guns have been regulated, including in these sensitive places. And even conservative Justice Scalia acknowledged that there could be limits on this right. But now there's just grave uncertainty as we have Congress and state legislatures trying to grapple with how to stop this explosion of gun violence. And this ruling certainly puts a lot of those efforts, I think, into grave uncertainty.
Elizabeth, Aaron, thank you both so much.